thanks for tuning in to the Women in Fantasy, brought to you by Multiverse 2020 GEEK, the fantasy track. For centuries, the role of female characters in fantasy were limited by the perceptions of the men who wrote them. Through female characters are now much more complex and layered, the women who create them are constantly fighting for a voice and a place within the genre. Here we will hear from women in fantasy about their experiences and perspectives. I'm Tyra Burton, and I'm a professor at Kennesaw State University, where I teach social media marketing. I'm also a podcaster about geeky things and gaming, and I write nonfiction, science fiction, and fantasy. Alexis, could you tell us about yourself and start our introductions?
Certainly. Hi, I'm Alexis Nichols. I'm an actress, voiceover artist, screenwriter, and I am actually studying right now to get my PhD in performance studies, so all-around artist.
That is awesome.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aziza Sphinx. I am a techie by trade, but I am a writer by necessity, and I'm a 100% Georgia Peach, born and raised. I am the author of the Navarro Vampire Tales, as well as a number of twisted fairy tale retellings.
Oh, sorry, that's me. Yes, I'm awake. Hi, my name is Dana Cameron. I am a refugee from academia. I was an archaeologist, and that informs my mystery writing and my urban fantasy. I also write a little bit of horror, a little bit of speculative fiction, a little Sherlockian pastiche. So.
Hi, I'm Galen Dara. I'm an artist illustrator. I come from a fine art background, but am delighted to be illustrating for cover art and magazine art in this beautiful industry of creative minds.
Wonderful. I'm so glad we're here today. And if you want to find out more about our panelists, please check the linked videos for them in the description or on multiversecon.org, where you can also find links to all of our programming. So speaking of multiversecon.org, if you're watching this and you want to be a part of the conversation during the weekend stream, join us on the Discord channel for this track for a watch party with some of us there to entertain you and inject. Instructions on how to get into our Discord can be found at multiversecon.org/Discord. We are collecting for charity, and I want to say this up front. Ko-fi.com/multiversecon. All donation, less the fees, will go to support Equal Justice Initiative. So check them out at eji.org, and remember that's kofi.com/multiversecon. So I think that takes us care of all of our housekeeping deals. So now we can really start, because I'm so excited to moderate this panel with such a diverse group of women that are from so many different industries within fantasy. So I think that's probably the most exciting thing. So I just want to start off with how do we think women are affected? How do you think being a woman is affected? I used to could talk, and then I stopped knowing how to talk. So let's try this again. How do you think being a woman has affected your existence in the fantasy genre? So let's see. Galen, you went last in our introduction, so let's let you go first.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I know that how I appear and how I show has been that's been a big thing about my own personal identity being in this field, because there's always been this like, hey, here's what a woman is supposed to look like. Here's what you see on the covers. Here's what you see in the illustrations. And as an illustrator, I'm like, oh, so here's how I make my illustrations. When I show up to be seen, here's what I'm supposed to look like. And it's something that I'm trying to push back on a little bit. And I don't know that I'm doing that it's a work in progress. But a lot of it for me has had to do with coming to terms with how a woman is supposed to look, how a woman is supposed to be seen, and trying to change and break that just a little bit, or find better ways to interpret that.
Absolutely. So Dana, you've got interesting perspectives both in archaeology and in writing mysteries and fantasy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this ties in a bit with what Galen was talking about, what people expect and what we may or may not actually do. Part of it is that when I was writing crime fiction, it was considered to be cozy or soft-boiled. It wasn't a hard-boiled, it wasn't noir. I didn't write noir then. But it was one of those things, it's like, oh, you write about old ladies and teacups. I'm like, no, I write about an archaeologist who's out in the field. She takes self-defense lessons so she can take care of herself, because after the first book, I didn't want her hit and beat up all the time. And so it's always explained like, well, yes, I'm doing a female character and she does these things as well. when it comes to fantasy, it's responding to the mystery community, the crime community. It's like, oh, you're writing those cute vampire stories. I'm like, well, they're not really romances, and that's usually and usually guys referring to them. There's a lot of action. There's a lot of globetrotting. I like writing these things. I like writing a big fight scene where I have all my figures like ranged around on my desk, and I can figure out how to have a really great interspecies combat melee session. And it's always like, oh, but fantasy is so cute. I'm like, well, y'all are writing these things like, how can I put this? Hard-boiled neighborhood gritty stuff, and you think of it as realistic, or say like Jack Reacher. That's about as fantastic a situation as I can imagine. I mean, this stuff is really not terribly realistic from the criminals I've known and hung out with, let's put it that way. A lot of the guys are writing things that are making themselves superheroes. So I see very little difference in what I'm doing and what a lot of my friends are doing and what they're doing. So it's constantly saying yes or no and.
Well, and I come from a romance background. So my first book was science fiction romance. So it's entirely different there, because in the romantic field, I'm kind of different because I don't write urban fantasy. I write fantasy and science fiction. So very much, even within the writing community of romance, which is by and large women, I was still different than who was primary there. And I know, Aza, you also write.
Yes, Aziza. It's Aziza. Yeah, so for me, I'm a lot of times the rebel. My women are very much not girly girls. I've never been the girly girls. I've always been kind of that girl. So even with their traditional jobs, one of my girls actually does demolition. So she blows stuff up for a living. And when she finds stuff, when she blows up, these buildings, there's this aspect that you have to address there. A couple of them are racers. So it's the whole adrenaline thing. But even when they come back to whatever paranormal they're dealing with, they're chasing kind of the adrenaline rush. And so, layering that with a lot of spiritual beliefs, especially related to death and how death is portrayed, for me, is always something that people are kind of side-eyeing me about, especially when I get out of the realm of Christianity and I start discussing and exploring kind of in a lot of different cultures. Mythology is kind of one of my things too. So layering all of these different belief systems within my writing, within the fantasy part, has always been a balancing act. And it's something that sometimes readers struggle with, but it's also something refreshing because it comes out as, oh, well, I never thought about that. And then it kind of piques their interest to maybe go and educate themselves on these other systems.
Absolutely. And anybody who's doing women as demolishers, blowing things up, I'm all for. So Alexis, how was it for you in going into acting and particularly voiceover? Because you do a lot of fantasy voiceover work.
I certainly do, and I have some experience with screenwriting as well. And to kind of answer that, ask that question in on terms of all aspects, when I don't have a project that inspires me and excites me that I find to be female empowerment and female centered, I write it. I just go ahead and write my own projects. My first attempt with screenwriting is when I co-wrote Becoming Lucy, which was a 20-minute short film about Lucille Ball that began as my master's degree senior thesis, my master's degree in acting. And after that, we had some investors come and watch a screening of it. People gave us some funding. We were allowed to create an original score. And then we took that version of the film and premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. And it is still traveling, which is really wild and really rewarding to see how this story of Lucy is still so incredibly relevant today. And she's such a powerhouse figure. So to be able to share her story is just incredible. I wanted to play her because frankly, it was a role that frightened me. They said, do something that scares you. It's your senior year, do something that's frightening. I couldn't think of anything more frightening than taking on the role of one of my biggest idols. So that's precisely what I did. And beyond that, of course, there's limitations for me physically as an actress, but that's part of what I enjoy very much about the world of voiceovers is that I am very often switching gender, age, etc., and really able to play around. And I enjoy that aspect of it the most. In fact, Little Witch Witch Academia, the Netflix original series where I voice 3 different characters, I have 3 different aged characters that I'm playing in that particular show. And so they're all female identifying characters, but they are all at very different phases of their lives. And I love to take on completely different personas as a voiceover artist, especially since there's nothing holding you back physically.
Oh, you could be anything, which is just awesome.
Yep. Wake up as one, go to sleep as another, you know?
So I think it's wonderful that Lucille Ball was one of your kind of idols or heroes, because she was such a woman, you know, in terms of taking her power. I'm interested to know what other women you all had that inspired you within your fields. So whoever wants to go first, dive in.
For me, it was Ellie Banks.
Yes.
I actually got to meet her in person before she passed. So, and listening to her story about how, you know, while she had this intent on starting with her vampire series, how she kind of found that really for her to get where she wanted to go with the ultimate goal with that, how she kind of had to start out with the romance stuff, and just kind of understanding that sometimes that's the way certain industries work, and you have to kind of work through whatever it is that you are presented with, and you overcome that. And for me, that was inspiring. And whenever I kind of get into that place where I'm not really sure if this is what I want to continue to do and all, I kind of sit back and reevaluate and look and say, hey, you know, how do I work this? I'm at a point where now I need to work something, and how do I work this to make it happen to get where my ultimate goal is?
She was an amazing woman.
I'll go. One of my heroes when it comes to, so I'm a visual artist. We make art that, you know, within an instance, you're able to capture, like, oh, here's what the book is about. Here's what the illustration is about. And when it comes to representing females, women in art, there's tend to be a standard of skinny, white, able-bodied, young. And one of my artists who I greatly admire is actually Julie Dillon. She's the first woman to win the Hugo Award. And one of the things that I love about her art is she takes all of those assumptions, size, able-bodied, skinny, white, young woman, and is able to turn those, completely break those, while creating stunning, compelling, brilliant art. Because that's what, I mean, it has to be, you have to want to look at it. And so the assumption is, well, okay, so it has to be skinny, white, young, you know, beautiful, able-bodied, to be able to make it something that people want to look at, and to be like, no, that is a false assumption. And Julie Dillon did an incredible job of making that a reality. And so just in terms of just a hero, she is someone who I will constantly look at as inspiration for how to be that brilliant visually with assumptions that need to be removed.
I have her art hanging on the wall to my left, because I am a curvy girl and she has women who look like me. And so that's absolutely so amazingly important.
Mm-hmm.
So Dana, I think you are chomping at the bit. I can feel it.
I'm just, I need to find some of Julie's art, because I didn't recognize the name. But I think the name that first came roaring to the front of my brain was Ursula Le Guin. And part of it, I didn't realize at the time, because I was reading it before I was an anthropologically trained archaeologist. And that's where her background and family were involved with too, I think. And she was always looking at topics that dealt with cultural issues that I'm interested in. For example, with Earthsea, she was talking about, she wanted to get away from the idea that a quest had to be about killing things. And I love the fact that she made something that was super suspenseful and still felt dangerous and didn't have anyone killing anything, which is kind of cool. And it's like, when you set up those kind of problems for yourself, it's like, oh wow, how can I give how can I tell a story that has all these elements but doesn't have these usual things that everyone seems to take for granted? And like reading her science fiction, The Lady of Heaven, where she was talking about color identity and race, and she just deals with all these great huge subjects. And each time she goes into writing a book, she says, okay, this is how I'm going to look at this. And you're like, oh wow, she's just sneaking that cultural observation and discourse into this. And it's just, I adore that. And it was afterwards, I'm like, oh, that's why I like her stuff so much, that's the kind of stuff I aspire to do, is to look at these topics and sort of pull them apart. And still tell a good story in the meantime, because as my husband keeps reminding me, it's not a dissertation. I'm sure you all have heard something along these lines too. You can't have the footnotes and the bibliography in the back. You just gotta make it an adventure as well. I'm like, okay, right.
Well, I always refer to them and her and Marion Zimmer Bradley, kind of the early grand dames, but the hidden grand dames, because they couldn't even use female names to write their stories to begin with. And so those were really the ones that I first looked at and saw and read and went. Actually did a paper on women in science fiction and fantasy when I was an undergraduate decades ago. And I wrote about how they literally hid themselves and their identities and tried to instead put forth characters of women that were more representative of not just the stereotypes. So for me, they were the big ones.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about stereotypes in fantasy, whether it's artwork or it's in the written word. What are some other stereotypes that are in fantasy of women that drive you crazy, and how you like to turn them on end?
I'll go first. Chainmail bikinis.
Yes. I'm a gamer. They drive me crazy.
And I'm like, why would you leave every vulnerable part of your body open? And by God, wouldn't it pinch? And every time I see something like that, it's like, I mean, I read a lot of the old sword and sorcery stuff and I enjoy it, but man, I have a character that I write about. And Aziza, I'd love to talk about shaped charges with you at some point. Who loves, she's a recovering covert operative. And I love just having the scene where she goes in and gets all of her gear, and she is getting, you know, the secondary weapon, she's got the range thing, which is she's dialing in for a shot, and she's got appropriate armor, and she knows how to take care of herself. But man, as much as I love, Gail Simone is the most recent, but the chainmail bikini, man, it's like, no, we wear clothes, we wear the boots, we get ready to go into a fight or a situation, and it's not just like, oh gosh, my hair, which, you know, sometimes it is, because sometimes you have to think about what you look like when you're going into a situation. Other times it's like, nope, just tie it back and start kicking ass.
And I'm so with you. Just to kind of continue off of that, it's the overt sexualization that is just absolutely nutty. It's like, it's the only thing that we'll get the opportunity to see. And to answer the last question briefly as well, that's part of why I like in particular and look up to so many clever women, that yes, while they might be incredibly beautiful, that's not what they choose to make the standout aspect and characteristic that they are remembered and known for. So in terms of my two answers from before, I would say that Dorothy Parker is a huge idol of mine. And I was very lucky. That was my first professional role, was playing her in, it was called An Evening with Dottie in North Hollywood, at the North Hollywood Arts Center. And it was so much fun to bring her story to life and wear that fabulous little short black bob wig, but she was just so clever, and her wit was so incredibly caustic. And a more modern example after that would also be Pauline Kael, the film critic with the New York Times. Very much those are women that, while incredibly stunning, that's not what they presented themselves with. They presented themselves with the power of their minds.
Yeah, and very non-apologetically.
Oh, very much so. Very much so.
And can I just say, as a fantasy gamer, because I'm a World of Warcraft girl, and I did a podcast called Leveling Azeroth, and there were no women that were talking about gaming and fantasy gaming, and I was so tired of chainmail bikinis on characters. I wanted girls that looked right, you know, that just all sizes of girls should be available and all types, and it still doesn't exist mostly in the gaming world, but there we have it.
It's going to get there though, Tyra. I'm so grateful, because I tell you, I have gained and dropped roles, gained and dropped weight, excuse me, for various roles. So I've been quite curvy, and I've loved it. And I've been really thrilled to see that there's so many different ways that sexiness is becoming a part of different body shapes. And I'm so thrilled to see that. So I think that time is coming, and I hope sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think whether my sister used to be a size 2 up to me who is not a size 2, and maybe double that size 2. So to have all of those represented in all of our forms and colors, and it's just what I hope for. And I think that in fantasy, when you're writing that, it gives you a chance to do that. Before I move on, does anybody have anything else they want to talk about breaking the stereotypes? I know, Eileen, you've done. Ooh, age.
The age one for me. Like, why is it that everybody who saves the world has to be in their 20s? Like, you don't know anything. Like grown people. Like by the time you get your late 30s and 40s, you've seen it and you've figured it out. And I mean, I'm just like, why are they all teenagers? Just like every single one of them is a teenager. Like, can I have some adult people who can actually use the knowledge that they've learned through the things that they've been through as adults to be the people who save the world?
I totally agree. Especially now that I've moved into that 5th decade. I want to see heroines that are my age too.
Yeah.
Right.
I think also another stereotype that I do like is I like it when it's broken, is a heteronormative stereotype, where it's basically for the male gaze, whether that person, that woman is like, okay, she's trying to get the gay man, she's got the man, or it's some sort of like, hey, it's lesbian for the man to watch. I like it when that has been shattered and it's like a woman is able to have her own sexual or whatever, however, her gender identity, her sexual identity, that becomes a thing that is for her and accurate for her, and not just heteronormative for an audience. So
yeah.
And I think in terms of going off of that as well, of looking forward and hoping that things are going to continue getting better, one of the things that I've noticed, especially in the last 5 or 6 years that I've been really thrilled to see, is how many clothing companies have been starting to open up their sizing and make it more inclusive. And I've really been thrilled with that. One in particular that comes to mind is a company that I've been lucky enough to work with, Pinup Girl Boutique. Their company not only is it American made, but they are, I believe they start at size 000 and go to size 34 or 35. I mean, they're really great. And I just hope so many more companies continue to follow in that vein.
And women love graphic tees. I'm tired of having to go to the men's section to get graphic tees. We like graphic tees too. I'm just saying.
Pardon me, but sing it, sister. It's true. It's so true. So what if we're looking at the fantasy space and we're talking to young people that are out there, what should the fantasy genre do in order to make a safer space for women and girls, or those that are identifying differently? How can they make that a safer space?
Seeking out authenticity, like really not trying to continue as the status quo, but seeking out authentic stories from as many different perspectives as you can get, and to encourage people to not continue to do these same stories. We've got plenty of those, and it's not to say that people can't still write those, but there are plenty of diverse, whether it be racial, whether it be gender identity, whether it be age, whether it be able-bodied or disabled, people who are hearing impaired. Like, there are so many options, and people are writing these stories. There are people out here who have these stories, but it's like the industry that they say it's lip service. They say that they want it, but then when people present these, well, but we don't know that we have a market, and somebody's coming with the numbers saying, yeah, you do. Here they are. I have people who are buying these. Believe your writers, believe your authors, and believe in them to actually seek out. And when they're coming to you with these options, actually grab hold of them and encourage them and help them to spread the word.
Aziza, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think that we need to be offering different narratives for audiences to connect with and to learn from and to see themselves and recognize themselves and their images in particular. Yes, ableism is really becoming a bit too much in the culture that we see in online video games and et cetera. And one thing as well that I have to say, and thank you for putting this panel together, is examples like this, is having events where we get together and we do talk and we do dissect and we do potentially have the harder conversations and look to creating a better future.
For me, I think one of the things that is important is to try to find mentors. Preferably maybe one that identifies as you do, but if not, it doesn't really matter if they're pushing non-binary women, whatever, in the gender spectrum, that find somebody who can help mentor you, because I think that is so important. To me, and especially in writing, the networking of authors and how we help each other and representing our authentic voice. So I don't know if any of you have mentoring experiences or other ways that you think that we can help with young people in our profession. But
well, even if it's not a mentoring situation, Tyra, I think even if you find a good group of readers, if you find your, and by which I mean writers who will read your work and critique it, a good critique group, that can do so much, because sometimes the mentor is there when you need her, and sometimes they're not. But sometimes if you are able to find a group of people who are willing to say, okay, I haven't seen this before. What are you trying to do? Oh, I get, if you do this, then I'll be able to get that too. And just having that critique can also be a really useful thing. And it also encourages you. I find it has pushed me to do harder things. I mean, Alexis, you were talking about doing things that scare you. And oftentimes that's that's where all the good stuff is. Because that's where it's like, oh, there's all the emotion, there's all the impact, there's all the thoughts. So mentors are great, but I would also advocate for, I mean, so you're talking, or we're talking about representation, or Galen was, sorry, and that in your work, and then having a good critique group. I think it's a way of building those communities within the community.
And I think this group speaks, oh, pardon me.
No, go on.
I think this group obviously feels quite strongly about the concept of mentorship, because just prior to getting started, so many of us were discussing about teaching. And, you know, oftentimes you might have someone that you love and look up to that is no longer with us, for you to have the opportunity to give back to them. So it's kind of giving back through their legacy in order to help bring the next round of performers up, if you're lucky enough to do so. And also just having people to go along on this journey. You're not quite so frightened to do so.
No, I agree. There's actually a women's gaming designers group in Atlanta. And I think that's one of the things that they really offer, is that safe space for women to be in an industry that's been led by men. Galen, how is it in the art community? Because to be honest with you, I don't know.
You mean representation-wise, or
representation and safer spaces, and how can you help that?
You know, it depends on, just like probably also within the writers, artists, there's going to be the full gamut. There's going to be places, communities that you can form with other artists, where are places where that'll be safe to explore both your own identity and how to create these kind of identities visually as artists. And then there's going to be those areas that are rampantly unsafe for a woman or for anyone who is not within the here's what's appropriate. You know, you got to look like this, you got to be this age, you got to be. I have been fortunate to be able to have mentorships with quite a few artists that have been able to teach me quite a bit artistically. One of the things that I am still personally trying to do is increase my knowledge and repertoire of a greater variety of artists. Like I'm a white cis woman, and that tends to be fairly common within the illustrators. I want to increase my own awareness of and community with other artists who identify differently or come from different backgrounds, and that's actually still that's a challenge that even I have a hard time overcoming. Like making those connections with artists who come from vastly different backgrounds as myself. And that's not so much a matter of just safe space. That's just a matter of like, hey, how do you find and cultivate these communities that draw these other people in? So it's still a question that I'm asking myself and trying to develop my own self, is where to make those connections with people who are vastly different than I am.
I agree. I think that creating community is a beautiful thing, and it is a difficult thing to try to, you know, find everybody, especially now that we can't find each other in person, how that has impacted all of us. So, so I was kind of wondering, what are the girls in fantasy that you love or hate that you've seen? You may not want to say the hate, but if you have one, you can't stand but to talk about. Who's out there that you want to kind of go, this is what I wish there was more fantasy about?
Do you mean a character or
character?
A creator?
We've done creators, but I'll take creators again, or a character. So like for me, I'm gonna go first just to roll it out. There's a character in World of Warcraft, Jaina Pridemore, and she has been through everything and everything. She's lost her love, her father, her village, everything, and everything's been destroyed and taken from her. She became very hard in terms of who she was. They would have described her with explicit language that I cannot use right now. But she rose above that to lead her people and save people and to rejoin with her family. So it's about strong leadership. And WoW actually right now had a strong leader on the Horde side and a strong leader on the Alliance side, which was unheard of when it started. So to me, that was a big change in the fantasy genre that I got to see play out on a video screen, which for me, is on a daily basis where I blow off some steam. So she's somebody that I would hold up as, go look at Jaina. She's got some interestingness about her. And there was silence, ladies. I know.
I'll go.
Oh, thank you.
It's all right. So for me, and actually I just discovered this character, Scarlett Bernard, who's Melissa F. Olsen's character. She's a null, so she's kind of the great equalizer in a sense of these other circles of magic that she's surrounded. So anybody who's within her quote unquote radius is any of their magic or any of their power is nullified. So the werewolves can't be werewolves anymore, vampires can't be vampires anymore, but her general job is getting rid of bodies. So she's kind of the cleanup crew. So she has this, what would normally be a non-traditional female type role, and that's what she excels in, and they rely on her to kind of clean up their body mess. You know, she's having to lift these bodies by herself into a furnace. So just the idea of that having that non-traditional role for a female, something that most people associate with, this is something that a guy is going to do. But also, you know, throughout the series, she's kind of learning her worth, and she's now starting to voice that. So, you know, instead of just signing on with, well, we're going to pay you this much and all, she's starting to say, hold up now, y'all kind of need me. So, you know, in those negotiations, to be able to come forth and say, hey, I have a worth and I know what my worth is, and you're going to compensate me for that, or there'll be other arrangements that need to be made. And so coming forth and being able to do that as a woman, whether in real life negotiating a salary at a job, or in this case in a fictional world, kind of that learning about yourself. And as you mature and as you start to go through things in life, you start to realize that, hey, I have these assets and I can actually bring something to the table, and I should be compensated in some way for that.
I have to say, it's such a said answer, I believe, but it really can't be said enough. I adore Carrie Fisher. Who doesn't? I mean, in Princess Leia, she's absolutely incredible, so much fun. We get to grow up and see her continuing with that powerful role, and of course, getting to know her more so as a person throughout her interviews. What a powerhouse woman, and she brings that to those roles. And also, as far as video games go, I have to say, I really enjoy myself some Bayonetta. Those heels that have the guns, I mean, are you kidding? They're so hot. I want them. And I grew up with Sailor Moon, so those are all shows that I, you know, from my childhood. And of course, I have to say the answer that from Little Witch Academia, Professor Ursula is just an incredible mentor. She's really kind and patient with her students and treats everybody equally, but of course can't help but have a few favorites, and just really works personally on her free time to assist and to be there. And I just think that's incredible. And then she fights butt during the day, you know, no biggie. It's fun to play her. Those fight scenes were awesome.
This is a one-time character appearance, but aside from saying, like, anyone that Charlize Theron is playing these days, but Furiosa, I am so sorry. I'm so mad that I didn't write that version of the Mad Max story, because through the whole thing, she's reached a point where she can't continue doing what she's doing, even though she is benefiting from the current organization. She realizes that it can't stand, and so she goes and does it, and she's so competent and confident, and just as ruthless as Max would have been. And what I love about that movie in particular, Fury Road, is that Max is essentially the dog. He's basically playing the same roles the dog played in all the other things, and she just owns the whole thing. And that the whole character was so beautifully realized, and what she was doing and how she was doing it was just amazing. And I'm completely jealous of not that I didn't write that. I don't think I could, but man, I was glad to see that. And every once in a while, it's like, no, just shoot him. You know, just shoot the lot of them, blow them all up. You know, and I adore that. She gets to be as tough as any of the guys, and that's why, like, she was doing that new. Those at the Old Guard. She's doing one of the lead players in that, or for the movie of it. And you know, she does all the bloodthirsty, wonderful things that I sometimes think about doing in my fictional worlds. Of course, not in real life. I would never, ever be that kind of person.
So mine is going to be any protagonist that was created by Octavia Butler is what I'm going to hold up. Like if I look at, I'm bad at her names, I'm not going to remember the actual names, but like the protagonist of Wild Seed, or the main protagonist of her Parable series. There was Parable of the Sower and Parable of, I forget, I think it was Leanna. See, I'm horrible with names, but the protagonist of that, the women that she creates, any of her short, I was introduced to her by her short stories. Any protagonist that Octavia Butler has created is someone that I have held up as something that just answers so many questions in so many satisfying ways for me about what it means, what it can be to be a woman. In all of the ways that that can be portrayed. So, and I wish, I just barely thought of this, so I wish I'd done enough research to be like, oh yes, I can name all the names from these characters and these short stories and these novels, but yeah, so I'll leave it at that. Any protagonist that Octavia Butler wrote.
Yeah, I can never remember character names, even if I write them sometimes, so which is really, really bad. Really bad. I have lots of Bibles, so I can remember. But I think one thing that I keep seeing echoed amongst us is we like to see women as multidimensional and not single dimensional, which I think a lot of times, regardless of what genre we were looking at, they were displayed as or used as a trope, or used as, you know, the mechanism to just move the story forward instead of being multidimensional. So it's nice to see that we all have ideas of what that could look like. So I'm kind of curious of what have you had an experience in your career when, as a woman, you've experienced something differently, or you got stopped because you were a woman, or you had to fight harder, or something where your gender and your gender identity and being your authentic self impacted your ability to do your work? Ooh.
I think we're rifling through which of the file folder we could bring up as options.
Isn't that the sad thing? I mean, doesn't that say a lot, that we're all like pausing, going, okay, which one?
Okay, so for me, I don't people just by nature in general. I am extremely sheltered in that aspect. Yeah, it's my reality, you know. I very much am a writer. I'm kind of on the borderline thing with that author, you know. Author requires you to actually go out and people. So, you know, for me, because I don't much care to people and I don't much care about people per se, I think my perspective would be, if I ran across that, I would be oblivious to it, because you don't matter. I'm doing this and I'm going to do this, and you can either get on board or you can go on about your way.
That's beautiful. I want to be you now, just so you know. I like people, so I get peopled a lot, but I wish I could have that attitude where it didn't bother me. Because I think that's beautiful. I think that's how we should be. So I'm looking at the other ladies. They don't know it. This is the hardest thing when you, by the way, whenever you do one of these video panels, for all of you out there in panel land, this is hard because we can't look at each other and signal on a table. So.
I mean, I'll be frank. Some of mine are situations that I wouldn't even feel comfortable bringing up, unfortunately. So, right. You know, some crazy things like that have occurred, but you endure and you move forward, and that's really all that you can do. Just know who you are.
I suspect I'm not saying anything that so many of you, I mean, I think virtually all of us are academics, or have been, or will have been, or are at the moment. I had just finished my dissertation, and I was looking for a job. Oh, this is a million of years ago.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
No, it's still awesome.
I'm impressed.
Thank you. And I had just gotten off of moderating one of the panels that was one of the hits, the whole archaeology conference and everything. And I was feeling really good about myself. And then I see my advisor talking to a young man who had not finished his dissertation, had in fact not even defended his proposal, and was like, okay, you need to start looking for these jobs and this one, I'll put in a good word for you. And I'm like, yeah, right here. And it's one of those things like, and that's where you realize, oh, okay, that's not how this all works. And what am I going to do about it? And in terms of writing, it's always just fighting against the thing of like, well, can you really write this kind of scene? Can you write something that, you know, can you write something that isn't sentimental? I'm like, watch me. Aziza, I really like what you said about people. I worry too much about what they think, and I really wish they would just all leave me be. But it's always coming up with that, like, well, can you write a good fight scene? Can you write something that's really gritty? And what I do is like, we had no idea you could write vampires that weren't heroes. I'm like, I can write a good villain. I can write some scary shit stuff. Let me, sign me up. But it's always saying, yeah, it's not what you think, or, oh, hey, wait a minute, I've got all these other creds, and how come I'm not getting picked for that team? That sort of thing. But I suspect everyone's got a story, or 6 or a dozen, or a file cap like that.
A lot of it goes back to what you were just discussing in terms of being viewed as a one-dimensional character or person rather than being seen as the fullness and the entirety that you are. I started my career predominantly as a model, and so people always presumed that I must be some sort of ditz. And when they found out that I spent my senior year, before I moved to LA and New York, I was going and studying abroad at Oxford University, and people were like, so what were you doing there? I was studying, of course. What does one do at Oxford, And that was just something that they couldn't seem to wrap their mind around sometimes. You have to be one or the other.
Yeah, expectations.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the ones, there's so many, but the one that comes to mind right now is assumptions about what parenthood is going to mean for your career and your trajectory and your career path. I know I got a lot of pushback about this just from my own family. If I have a child and questions were asked about me pursuing my career and traveling for my career and things like that would not have been asked if I had been, say, for example, a father of a child instead of a mother of a child. There's a lot of assumptions about what you can and can't do as a mother that would never be asked of, or frequently, in my experience, are not asked of the fathers. And so that just a general, in terms of just life decisions, in terms of your family and if you're going to have a child, and assumptions and stereotypes that are going to be put on you because of those decisions.
Yeah.
Red carpet questions. Hello. Everything is all about who you're wearing and why, etc. I even had somebody do a zoom in of my nails one time. I'm like, would you like me to talk about the characters and what I've been actually doing? No. And then they ask that of the men, but oftentimes not of the ladies.
It's very frustrating, I think, because when I didn't get married till I was 41 years old. And literally, then people started to ask me when I was going to have babies. I'm like,
yeah,
we're 41 here. Probably not. Nice to see you. I'm happy, completely fulfilled without them. Would have loved them if they came. I'm a great aunt, by the way. So
I bet you have great energy.
So for me, since I teach business students at Kennesaw State, and one of the things that was different about the men and the women there was my male students would be like, oh, 3 to 5 years experience. Well, what the heck? I'm going to apply anyway. I'll be able to show them in my thing, or they'll, they would fly it up the flagpole, and all the girls would be like, oh, I don't think I have this. And they would have a lot of the things that they needed. They might have 1 or 2 they didn't, but they would back away from putting themselves forward. So I see that so much. And I think it happens within the artistic communities as well. It's not just my business students applying for jobs. I think that holding ourselves back because we don't have faith, or we look at something and think, oh, well, I'm not quite that. Fly it up the flagpole. I mean, try it. I think that what you, Alexis, were talking about originally with jumping into your fear, taking that and pushing forward. So I think that those are so important. So what are you working on now that you think is all about our topic today, about women in fantasy, and what are you excited about, and what boundaries do you hope you're breaking? Oh no, I'm back to quiet again.
No silence this time.
I know. Okay,
no.
fine.
Okay, so I actually have a couple of things that I'm working on. One of kind of my loves is to do twisted fairy tales, and I typically like to turn it around so that the person who that everyone thinks is the good guy or has portrayed as the good person in a lot of these the Disney versions of the fairy tales, because a lot of them are, of course, are based off of mythology and these older folklore tales from different cultures. So I like to switch them around. And so I'm in the process. I actually did the dystopian version of The Grasshopper and the Ant. I've done kind of the switch around with Little Red Riding Hood, where, you know, Little Red Riding Hood and as innocent as everybody believed her to be. And again, it's adding that different perspective from traditionally as a Black woman being looked at not necessarily as much as Black men, but as the bad guy. That I'm loud, that I'm going to be, you know, have an attitude and these types of things, and portraying that reversed in these traditional stories that were meant to give you lessons on, you know, how to be a good person or how to experience life or things you should be cautious of. You know, they're all grounded in keeping safety and providing these lessons. So right now I'm working on a couple of remakes of some fairy tales, and then I have a couple of other stories that again take that aspect of death and how most people consider, you know, it's doom and gloom and everybody's fighting the end and no one wants to, you know, people want to live as long as possible, and actually again turning that around and looking at death as a lot of religions and spiritualities look at it, where this is a transitional period. This is about the energy flow and about how everything comes through in a circle. And, you know, if there's a beginning, there has to be an end, but the end doesn't necessarily mean that that's it. It could just be the beginning of a new cycle.
Oh, I read your short story today, Aziza. The one with Lavinia and in the rose garden, and that was fun. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah. I'll go next. I have a couple of things I'm shopping around. One is 18th Century Noir. Okay, it's not my cat. All right.
Oh, sorry.
Nope, no problem. It's I'm writing an 18th Century Noir set in Boston, because I wrote a short story for a collection called Boston Noir about 10 years ago. I love the character because she terrified me. I had no idea when I'd written that first short story. I'm like, oh, she's not well. But the thing was, it's like, what do you do when you have something that everyone wants and there's no one looking out for you? Your husband is trying to sell you out. The local gangsters want to take over your tavern. There's no police force and there are no rights for women. So what do you do? And I went through the process of figuring out what she would do. On a lighter note, I wrote my version of the male action hero thriller novel. And I mentioned her before, my covert operative who's supposed to be retired but can't quite manage to keep her nose out of other people's business when she thinks she knows best. And it was just fun writing someone who blew things up and knew all the ordinance and all that kind of stuff. But the thing I'm working on now is actually kind of the most revealing, I think, in terms of this panel. I'm writing a horror novel about, it's set just after the First World War. So I'm talking about flappers and demons, and realizing that sometimes, I think Aziza, you mentioned this before, when you flip things around and look at them differently, wow, you know, there's a lot of power in being the monster and being the bad guy. And how might one use this? If you're going to be tarred as this, the other thing, why not make it work for you? And that's been kind of fascinating. I think it's easiest to tell these kind of stories. I'm always talking about women and empowerment and culture, and in telling these stories, using genre fiction makes that a lot easier. You get the story, but you also have that little seed of, oh, hey, there are things to think about here that I really like.
I have a lot of different things that I've been working on in different capacities that I think very much relate to the topic. The first most obvious one is Little Witch Academia has their next video game getting ready to come out. So we already have Chamber of Time, the Nintendo game, and now they're having virtual reality broom racing, which is a lot of fun. And I was very lucky. I got to actually play a demo of that last year at Anime Expo when I hosted a panel of my own of the rest of the team, from everybody from Little Witch Academia with the English dub, and it's incredibly fun. So there's that. I also got to voice a character that was really special to me in The Blue Elephant. I played Hope the Butterfly. It's on Audibly, but what I'm really most excited about is that it was a part of a short film as well, and it is all about grieving for children, and it's very much about embracing and connecting with your emotions, and I think that's important for both little girls but also little boys as well. well. And so I think that's very much related. I did a photo shoot, interestingly enough, on Zoom with Italian Vogue, which was really bizarre. They took images through the screen, and the reason that that came across very much as very different and very feminist is because I am only 5'3", and that is very much a high fashion magazine, and I am quite curvy. So,
Awesome.
so I was definitely a different physique for that, which was really neat. And my dissertation, thus far, my dissertation topic is going to be feminist performances of voice, but speaking voices, and how oftentimes we feel the need to put on a certain type of voice to be taken either more seriously or to be portrayed in the opposite and come across as ditzy and be a little easier for people to manage and handle us in that way.
It's true. I have teacher voice. Galen, what are you doing?
I'm trying to think of like a specific project that I'm working on that is directly connected to these topics. And I mean, I love all of the authors that I'm working with and the projects that I'm working on. None of them right now specifically deal with the issues that we've been talking about today. So I'm just going to say it's me as a woman trying to balance these while I'm also trying to balance a family with COVID and a son who's suddenly in online school and in my space all the time. And so the complexity of me, myself, a woman, trying to do what I do, this career as an artist in this time right now that is a little bit challenging, especially especially with a child in online school. I wish I had something a little more glamorous to share, but that's about the extent of it right now. I'm surviving this and staying on top of my workload. And
that is still quite a lot.
Yes.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, no, that's authentic and it's truth. I mean, I think we're all, because of COVID, dealing with having to have multiple roles that we didn't have before. I am tired of washing dishes. I just want to say that. Oh my gosh. Dishes can just go. So we have a few more minutes left. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, we kind of threaded it through, was how can we write or depict male characters differently to help with female characters and how they're seen. So one of the things I did in Penduli Station is our hero is actually the empath, not the female. And usually the female is always the one that's feely, touchy, and this one, it's the male. And I tend to do that. I tend to make men more empathic, more sensitive, and the women a little bit more in their heads. So that's one of the ways that I know that I'm doing it. But what else do you think we can do in terms of embracing diversity and making that a part of fantasy in terms of other characters? And you're on, go.
We're kind of doing that with it's not science fiction, it's not fantasy, I'm gonna call it sci fantasy. It's kind of that same situation where instead of having to protect the younger people and that falling on the women, it's actually more so falling on the men. And in essence, it's kind of that idea of community that for my characters, the parent per se, mother and father biologically, are not the keeper of the children or not the protector of the children, but really it is the elders, because there's this idea that babies and the older people are closer together on that, again, veil between life and death. And so the elder men are actually the ones who more so care for the young children, because they're able to communicate with those messages that need to be delivered to the community before the elder passes on back to the beginning and the child then continues on the cycle.
One of the things I was surprised by when I was writing my Fangborn series, werewolves, vampires, oracles, and archaeology, because I can't help myself, was that the main character, Zoe, who's the protagonist through the 3 books I wrote with them, she's a werewolf. She grew up outside the community that would have raised her to know who and what she was and what her powers were and what her responsibilities were. And I thought I had the character that she was her love interest, and they were going to be together, forever. And it became very clear to me after a while that he didn't respect her as she was maturing and figuring out how to use her power, how to use her voice, how to use the influence that she had. And I'm like, oh my God, I think this other guy is really a much better fit, and there seems to be this chemistry. And the editor I was working with says, well, yeah, because his mother was a senator and he understands about powerful women and this, that, and the other thing. So I thought it was really funny that my character was sort of teaching me like, yeah, no, this guy isn't the right one for her. Because I did want her to have if not a happily ever after, then a happy for now, or happy every once in a while, because otherwise it got pretty lonely. But it's that idea. In fact, I got so annoyed with that first character that I abruptly killed him. And my editor and my agent said, no, you can't do that. I'm like, he really needs killing. He's just got in the way. He's almost, got rid of ruined the entire mission. Like, well, maybe she could only, she wasn't the one who killed him, but maybe she could save him and give him a stern talking to him. Like, seriously? But it was one of those moments like, you can't just kill him just because you're tired of him. Like, everyone else does that, so why shouldn't I? In any case, it was a good lesson in character development as well as not killing off the love interest.
Usually bad, not a happily ever after.
Yeah, he needed it though, man. He wasn't getting the picture. Sorry.
I think as well, it's kind of like what I was saying before, which is events like these, consciousness raising that occurs as a result of these types of events, and to continue to write our own stories and then fight to get them made, especially if it is something outside the typical narrative.
Yeah.
Because we got to see ourselves on the screen. You have to recognize. Every single person needs to be able to recognize. And that's one of the things I did. I was editor-in-chief of Flip magazine for 4 years. And I fought to have a lot of diversity in that magazine. And I felt very strongly that that was incredibly important for us to be able to do. I wanted, and in particular, we brought up ageism before. That was a big thing for me. I wanted to have people of all ages on the magazine covers and looking fabulous while they did it. Because I think so often when we're walking and going through the aisles in grocery stores that it's not quite like that. So I wanted Flip to be a little bit different under my direction.
And Galen, I think what you said about art, do you want to talk about how men are seen in art?
Well, I think it kind of jumps off a little bit with Alexis with what you just said. Something that I have to do is pay attention to my own talking patterns and my own speech patterns, because I find that I have an implicit tendency to kind of minimize what I do, minimize my achievements. It's kind of like it's a humble thing. It's kind of like, oh, I'm being humble, but to be very aware of that and realize when I might be doing it in a way and in a group where I am amongst my peers. Like my achievements are equal to a lot of these men that I may be talking with and that I may be communicating with. And so to pay attention to my own speech habits when I may be actually the culprit of minimizing my accomplishments and my experience in a way that may not be to my best interest or to the best interest of anyone who's hearing me speak. And that's a speech pattern and a persona pattern that I was raised into. And I have to learn how to be a lot more self-aware of that and fight against my own worst instincts, I guess you could say, when it comes to how I present and interact with a group of my peers, both men and women, and being sure that I'm not the one who's being my worst enemy. That's what I would say, put out.
No, and I appreciate you saying that, because I know that I personally do that all the time. All the time. I use that self-deprecation to make points and make people feel comfortable. And sometimes we need to stand up and be the warrior women that we are.
We're kneecapping, right? Kneecapping our phrases. I think you should leave. You should leave. I don't kind of, I think this. Make it clear. You know what you're saying, so own it.
I'm Southern. We're supposed to say I think. Bad training, just like you said. So if you want to find out more about our panelists, don't forget that you can look at the linked videos that are in the description to find out where you can find all these lovely people's work, because we've each reached the end of our panel. So if you've enjoyed this panel, be sure to check out the rest of Multiverse's other programming this weekend. Our full schedule is available on multiversecon.org. And if you want some Multiverse swag, check out the store on our website. There are shirts, enamel pins, and more, though we do not have cute cats that meow. I love that. My cat co-teaches with me, so I think it's beautiful. So thank you, ladies. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Tyra. Thank you for wrangling us. That was fun. It was lovely to meet all of you.
Yes. Go out and don't kneecap yourself.